Ukraine is large scale ground combat, a different kind of war. But there are some lessons, and I come at this question from this perspective. There are Russian officers who have been involved in this in the conflict from the get go, in the conflict in Ukraine. They were involved in Mariupol, which was urban warfare. And they have taken a look at the Israeli tactics and they've said, you guys would get slaughtered if you fought the Ukrainians. The Israeli Defense Force would be slaughtered. They'd lose everybody because their tactics are just stupid in terms of large scale ground combat. But the Israelis aren't fighting a conventional military force, they're fighting an unconventional military force. But, you know, their tactics are stupid, not because they're the wrong tactics, they are, but because they're being executed by a military not trained properly to execute them. The IDF is very sloppy, very sloppy. The concept of security is non-existent. Hamas is able to pop up, destroy tanks, kill Israeli soldiers. Armor is going forward unsupported by infantry because the infantry is scared. The Israelis are not a very good military. They're competent to a degree against an enemy like Hamas. But if they fight Hezbollah, and again, the expansion of this conflict that draws in Hezbollah will outclass them every way. Hezbollah has been preparing for this war. Israel's not ready for this war. Their troops are not motivated. There will be slaughtered if they go to war against Hezbollah. The only thing Israel has is an air force. Let's put it this way. If you took the Israeli air force out of the equation in Gaza, Hamas would kill every single Israeli soldier there. That's the truth, because the Israelis just aren't that good.
Is the Netanyahu administration looking for capturing Gaza in totality?
The humanitarian pause was a defeat for Netanyahu. Remember, the Netanyahu government said there will be no ceasefire, and they aren't going to trade, exchange prisoners for hostages, that they're there to defeat Hamas, defeat them politically, militarily, and they were unable to do that. And the implementation of the Dahiyad doctrine, this collective punishment, and you combine that with, again, we have to deal with another reality here. What Israel knew about Hamas in Gaza is no longer at play. Hamas, when they attacked on October 7th, captured the computer servers containing the Israeli intelligence about their assets inside Gaza. So Israel went blind in terms of human resources. They attacked the Unit A200 signals intelligence platforms. Israel went blind in terms of intercepting communications. So what Israel thought they knew about Gaza changed overnight. When they went in on October 7th, 8th, 9th, and thereafter, they're going in blind. They have to start all over. And how does Israel do this? Through an over-reliance of artificial intelligence. They have a targeting algorithm that they've developed where they've linked each house in Gaza to a specific outcome for Hamas. It doesn't mean that they're going to achieve it, but if you hit this house, this is what it does to Hamas. And they also know that this is how many civilian casualties will be accrued. So there is no, this is collateral damage. We had no idea so many people would die. This is deliberate murder based on target. It's called the gospel. I think the Jewish term is hasbara or something of that nature. That's in play today. This is mass murder, genocide by the Israeli government against the Palestinian people. And it failed. And so it failed on a number of fronts. It failed in regards to Hamas, but because it failed so egregiously, the Netanyahu government was under pressure from a domestic audience saying, hey, you're not succeeding. We need our relatives freed. We need the hostages released. The entire world reacted to this collective punishment, this indiscriminate bombing with horror, millions of people in the streets. The United States State Department filed a memorandum, internal memorandum, a dissent memorandum saying the policies of the Biden administration are destroying the credibility and viability of America abroad. And so we started putting pressure. So Netanyahu had to agree to a ceasefire. He didn't want to. This was a political disaster for him. And so he was looking for any excuse to get out of the ceasefire. He found it. They're now back at war. He can't afford to have a second ceasefire. That would be the end of him politically. But he's failing militarily. As we speak, the Netanyahu government is being, the IDF, I mean, is being defeated in certain areas of Gaza. They've had to retreat from certain areas in Gaza because of the casualties they've taken. This is hugely demoralizing for their military. So Netanyahu is in his government are in a very dire straits in terms of their domestic political reality. There's nothing they can do to change the fact that Netanyahu's political days are over. He is the problem, not the solution. He will be removed from power, either from pressure from the United States or pressure from domestic or both. But we need to stop talking about what Israel wants right now. Israel doesn't want anything. Netanyahu wants everything. He needs to be removed and a new, more legitimate Israeli government in place that speaks on behalf of the majority of the Israeli population, then can speak about what they want. They may not change their policies. Who knows? But I think, real politic will set in, and the Israelis are going to have to make adjustments. Economically, they cannot sustain this fight indefinitely. With hundreds of thousands of reservists mobilized who are no longer participating in the economy, with tens of thousands of Israeli citizens displaced from not only around Gaza, but in the north, forced to be resettled, no jobs. They're living off of the support provided by the Israeli government. The economy is faltering. Hundreds of thousands of Israeli Jews are fleeing Israel for more stable locations. This is a strategic defeat, a disaster for Israel, that if they can't find the way to defeat Hamas, and I don't believe they can, you can't defeat an ideal, especially one that resonates so strongly amongst not only the Palestinian people, but the entire world. It can't be defeated by Israel. So I think Israel won't get what it wants out of this war. We have to understand that they did not initiate this conflict. They didn't want this conflict. They weren't expecting this conflict. The Netanyahu government on October 6th had a policy that was predicated on the normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia, the initiation of this new economic-based conception that was described by Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden announced it during the G20 meeting in India, talked about the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. Benjamin Netanyahu bragged about it during his presentation to the General Assembly in the United Nations. This was the direction that Israel was going. Israel was also, under the Netanyahu government, making sure that there would never be a two-state solution, never be a Palestinian state. They were in the process of expanding operations to create new settlements in the West. And they thought that they had bought off Hamas and the Palestinians in the Gaza by increasing the number of work permits, that this perception of new economic viability on the part of the Gazan Palestinians linked to a relationship with Israel, an ongoing economic relationship, would preclude any precipitous actions by Hamas. So when October 7th came around, the Netanyahu government is faced with a whole new reality. And now they're adjusting to. And this reality is 100% security, politically motivated. It's couched as a security reaction, but it's political. Benjamin Netanyahu was a politician already fighting for his political life prior to October 7th because of what he had done in terms of rewriting Israeli basic law regarding control of the judiciary. It was supposed to be an independent branch of government, and instead, under the new law, it would be subordinated to a politicized Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And the purpose of this wasn't to improve Israeli jurisprudence, but rather to prevent the prosecution of Benjamin Netanyahu on corruption charges. So, hundreds of thousands of Israelis were already in the streets protesting against this man. The Israeli president had said that the situation was so dire that Israel could be looking at an actual civil war. And then comes October 7th. And so you have this already unpopular prime minister now presiding over the greatest security failure in the history of Israel. This is bigger than 1973 Yom Kippur War. This is a absolute failure on the part of the Netanyahu government, but also Israeli intelligence and the Israeli Defense Force themselves. And so the entire leadership of Israel is at risk of losing political viability, meaning that they should and could possibly be removed from power at any moment. The only reason why they're staying in power is because the Netanyahu government now has declared war, or as they have said, war was declared on Israel by Hamas. And if you're in for a dime, you might as well be in for a dollar. So if you're going to go to war with Hamas, now you articulate goals and objectives that reflect this war status. And you say that Israel is going to destroy not only the military aspects of Hamas, the organizational structures of Hamas, but politically, Hamas will be eliminated. Hamas will never again rule Gaza. And if you look at it from that standpoint, Israel has failed across the board. When we take a look at the millions of people who are in the streets in cities around the world protesting in support of Palestine, they're protesting in support of Hamas. They may not admit they are, but the reality is they wouldn't be there if it weren't for Hamas. They wouldn't be there if Hamas hadn't attacked Israel and created this overreaction, or the opportunity for this overreaction. It's Israel that has done it to itself. Israel didn't need to invoke the Dahiya doctrine, named after the West Beirut suburb, which in 2006 Israel flattened as part of a new principle of collective punishment, that makes sure that any civilian population linked to a political entity that is poses a security threat to Israel, that they will be punished collectively to put pressure on them, to pressure their own political entity to stop doing what Israel objects to. It was done against the Lebanese to put pressure on Hezbollah. It failed miserably. And it's been done repeatedly against the Palestinians in Gaza to put pressure on Hamas. This is even prior to October 7th, and it's failed miserably. And it's failing now. This collective punishment that Israel has undertaken has turned the world against Israel. This is a victory for Hamas. We need to also point out that the Netanyahu government was vociferously against a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, said there will not be one. They believe in Eretz Israel, Greater Israel, or Biblical Israel. That doesn't include any notion of Palestinian statehood. And so right now, the entire world is talking about the absolute necessity of a two-state solution. Again, this wouldn't have happened without Hamas. Israel had taken thousands of Palestinians prisoner. They'd taken thousands more prisoner, treated them brutally, subjected them to torture, rape, murder. Nobody was talking about putting pressure on Israel to release these prisoners, these hostages held by Israel, until Hamas attacked on October 7th and took hostages of their own, which they use as a bargaining chip. This is a Hamas victory, not an Israeli victory. Israel is suffering huge political consequences. More pressure is put on Netanyahu daily by the families of the remaining hostages to get their release. And Israel is not destroying Hamas. Hamas military is fighting the Israeli Defense Force to a standstill in many parts of Gaza. They're inflicting very significant casualties on Israel. And remember, Israel says that their victory is defined by the total destruction of Hamas. And if Israel doesn't achieve that, then Israel has by definition lost. and Israel right now is not achieving this. So the Netanyahu government has achieved nothing. They've made the situation even worse for Israel, and they've made it worse for them politically. Netanyahu has a 4% approval rating. He had an emergency meeting of his war council the other night, and he concluded the business without holding the things he was putting forward up to vote. The point is, Israel's achieved none of its objectives, and it's not going to achieve these objectives. These objectives unrealistic, and the Netanyahu government isn't doing anything for the legitimate security of Israel. They're doing everything for their own political survival. And I think their days are numbered. I think pressure is being put on them internally from domestic political opposition and externally from friends and allies, including the United States, who are saying that it's increasingly clear that the problem here is Benjamin Netanyahu, and that Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing coalition government have to step aside, have to get out of the way.
When it comes to the situation that Israel was in before October 7, in terms of their relations with Arab states, with other countries surrounding Israel, how do you see it right now?
The fact is, Israel is in very many ways, because of its overwhelming support by the United States, the support that it gets from the United States, has become a de facto indispensable nation of the Middle East. And you combine that with the reality that, with very few exceptions, most nations in the Middle East are not pro-Palestinian. They're not supportive of the Palestinian Authority or a Palestinian state. And that Israel had exploited this antipathy amongst the Gulf Arab nations, for instance, amongst Israel's immediate neighbors, toward the Palestinians for their own good, leveraging the concept of the possibility of a Palestinian state that could never be reach manifestation because of the definition. This is the Abraham Accord. What Israel has said about a two-state solution, it's unattainable, unachievable, unrealistic, but it's there on the table. And the Arab nations who claim to be supporting Palestine, but who secretly don't, say, well, Israel's made a good faith effort here. Now we'll normalize relations with Israel so we can get on with reaping the economic and geopolitical benefits of normalization. That all appears to be on hold, but nothing's fundamentally changed. The political reality of the situation is such that these nations have to take a stance that appears to be supportive of the Palestinian people, of a Palestinian state, but they are distancing themselves from Hamas, and they aren't cutting off relations with Israel, which tells me that if and when this conflict ends, and it will end, that there's a real risk that the nations that are lining up to support a Palestinian state today will slide back to their previous posture of either indifference or hostility towards Palestine. And this will be to the benefit of Israel. Now, the longer this conflict goes on, and the deeper the damage that Israel is doing to itself in terms of its how the world perceives it, could create a new political dynamic, a new political reality amongst these Arab states. And if that happens, then there will be a Palestinian state. There's no doubt in my mind. But if this conflict is brought to an end, and then the cause of a Palestinian state goes into endless negotiations by people who really don't have the best interests of Palestine in mind, we could find ourselves returning to square one, which then brings up Hamas, which is not going to quit until there is a Palestinian state. And I think that the failure of Israel to defeat Hamas empowers Hamas politically and gives them increased leverage to tell the Arab world, the Islamic world, that we will not go away. We will not quit. We will continue to resist. And that the best way to bring peace and stability to the region is to create a true independent Palestinian state, which includes Hamas as a political entity. You can't make Hamas disappear. If there were elections in the Palestinian, in the Gaza and West Bank today, I think Hamas would win overwhelmingly. The Palestinian Authority has no credibility. None, zero credibility. Hamas has all the credibility in the world because it's the only um, Arab organization that's fighting for the Palestinian people.
How do you see the possibility of Hezbollah getting more seriously involved in this battle? Is that possible, in your opinion?
Oh, of course it's possible. It's even likely, given what Hezbollah has done, is it has maintained a extraordinarily high levels of pressure on Israel along the border between Israel and Lebanon. Um, the purpose of this was to uh, force Israel to divert resources from Gaza to Lebanon and to put strain, economic and political strain on Israel at a time when it was supposed to be singularly focused on resolving the Gaza crisis. Up to 70,000 Israelis have been evacuated from northern Israel. They have to be housed, cared for at enormous economic cost to Israel. Whatever economic activity took place in the north has come to a halt. Um, so that's an unsustainable reality that Israel can't just allow to occur. And Hezbollah keeps ratcheting up the pressure. Israel right now has confronted Benny Gantz, the Minister of War, has come out and said that Israel has no choice but to turn its attention to Lebanon to compel Hezbollah to withdraw from the border. This is suicidal. Lebanon is as prepared for whatever Israel is going to do as Hamas was prepared for Israel. And Hezbollah is an organization that has far more military capacity than Hamas. It will be fatal for Israel to expand this conflict, and I think that's why it might not happen. Is that the Israelis know that if they engage decisively with Hezbollah, they will suffer a decisive defeat, and that could be very problematic, not only for the Netanyahu government, but for anybody who's joined his coalition, his wartime coalition, like Benny Gantz and others. So it's a very dangerous situation, one where there is an absolute threat of an expansion of this conflict to draw in Hezbollah, but also one that the consequences of such expansion are so dire that it might be difficult for Israel to act on it, which is what Hezbollah is betting on, that Israel will make a decision to seek a ceasefire before they make a decision to escalate. Time will tell.
One of the countries that is so important is Saudi Arabia. How do you see their policy in Gaza? Are they looking for some sort of sanity, some sort of solution for Gaza?
Well, their official position and what their real position is might be two different things. Their official position is that they support Palestine, they support the Palestinian people, they support a two-state solution, and therefore they are opposed to the ongoing Israeli actions. Their unofficial position is they were ready to normalize relations with Israel to, offset the axis of resistance, Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, the Houthi, pro-Shia militias in Iraq. Yes, because of China, Saudi Arabia, and Iran had normalized relations. But that doesn't mean that Saudi Arabia is going to roll over and play dead. Was not a Saudi surrender. And Saudi Arabia was very interested in ensuring that it maintain a dominant geopolitical position vis-a-vis the Middle East, and they were looking to do that by normalizing relations with Israel and creating the conditions where Israel would be able to insert itself into the Persian Gulf region in a way that helped offset, Iran's growing stature in these nations that are linked to the axis of resistance. So the Saudis are in a very, they're stuck between the horns of a dilemma right now. They can't continue to carry out a policy which, by any stretch of the imagination, is pro-Israeli in nature, normalizing relations, bringing Israel into the Gulf region to offset Iranian influence. And they can't ignore the new reality generated by Hamas's military operation on October 7th and what's transpired since then by ignoring a Palestinian, two-state solution. So I think what Saudi Arabia is doing is buying time, saying all the right things, hosting a conference, but doing nothing, and waiting to see where the chips finally fall before they would decisively commit. Remember, Saudi Arabia's number one purpose for doing anything is to benefit Saudi Arabia. So they're not going to be looking for something that brings about in and of its own right a regional peace and security. They're going to be looking for something that benefits Saudi Arabia. It may be something that benefits regional peace and security, but it may be something different. Saudi Arabia has a vision. I think they call it Vision 2030, about a new Saudi Arabia, new economic realities, new social political realities, and that's the direction that MBS is taking Saudi Arabia, and they cannot support anything that threatens that vision, because that vision is about a redefining of Saudi Arabia. It's what its economy looks like, what its geopolitical posture looks like, and that's going to require a lot of money to make happen, and that money won't be there if Saudi Arabia does anything that causes a disruption to its oil-based economy, or fundamentally changes the balance of power in the Middle East, so that Saudi Arabia is compelled to take an action one way or the other. So this is a very, very dangerous situation, and one can always hope that the Saudis find a way to navigate their way through these troubled waters. I think it's important to point out that Israel wasn't the only nation taken surprise by Hamas's attack on October 7th. Saudi Arabia was taken by surprise, and Iran was taken by surprise. Prior to October 7th, Iran and Saudi Arabia were working together to create regional stability based upon the emphasizing diplomacy over military confrontation. They had exchanged ambassadors, and they were moving forward in a very coherent fashion to achieve I think their collective desire for regional stability. After October 7th, both Saudi Arabia and Iran are struggling to catch up to the reality of what happened. Iran certainly doesn't want a larger regional war. Iran doesn't want to be drawn into the fighting, and Saudi Arabia doesn't want that either. Remember when Saudi Arabia hosted the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic States to a conference, an emergency conference on Gaza? Iran participated. The Iranian president has flown to Riyadh and has met with MBS and other Saudi officials to talk about the Gaza situation. So I think what we're seeing here is that Iran and Saudi Arabia are making sure that whatever transpires vis-a-vis Israel and Hamas, that their relations will remain on track in terms of positive interaction, conflict avoidance, peacemaking, and joint economic prosperity. So I think you're going to see the Iranians and the Saudis, working together to keep this conflict contained to Gaza and Gaza alone. It's a very difficult challenge. Look at the Houthi; they've basically expanded the entire Red Sea into a combat zone, and the support that Iran provides to the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, that Iran provides to Hezbollah. This is real, but I don't think neither Iran nor Saudi Arabia are going to lose strategic focus, and the strategic focus right now is determined more by the peacemaking of China in bringing about a rapprochement between these two countries than how Iran and Saudi Arabia are reacting to what Israel's doing in Gaza.
When this conflict ends, is the Netanyahu administration capable of rebuilding their relations with these Arab nations, Turkey? Is that possible for the Netanyahu administration, or do we have to have a new administration in Israel who's capable of doing such a thing?
Well, first of all, we have to recognize that Benjamin Netanyahu is one of the all-time great political survivors. And people in Israel have been trying to get him out of office for some time now, and yet he somehow manages to land on his feet. So you never want to underestimate Benjamin Netanyahu and his ability to control Israeli politics in a way that keeps him in power. Having said that, though, his support rate is at 4%. That's not sustainable. That's not viable. So I believe that there will be a change of government in Israel. I believe it'll be sooner rather than later, given the enormous negative consequences that have accrued since the Hamas attack on October 7th. Netanyahu is the problem. He's the man who is asleep at the wheel, and you can't trust him to do the right thing for Israel, because what he's trying to do is the right thing for keeping Netanyahu in power, and those two goals and objectives may not coincide. So I don't think that we're going to see a situation where this conflict ends and then Netanyahu steps aside. I think we're going to see a situation where Netanyahu is compelled to step aside, and then this conflict ends, and then we find out if the world is capable of negotiating in good faith about the future demarcation between Arabs and Israelis. Well, I mean, first of all, we have to take a look at the conduct of this conflict so far. We start on October 7th, and we see Hamas executing one of the most professional military operations imaginable. I'm not condoning the deaths of civilians. That's always, a tragic situation. But let's be honest, there's sufficient eyewitness account coming from Israeli sources that indicate that a significant number, perhaps even the majority of the Israeli civilians killed on October 7th were killed by Israelis in a crossfire, the aggressive tactics used by the Israeli Defense Force, etc. Indeed, many of the people who participated in the outdoor concert, and over 260 of them were killed. It appears that a significant number of them may have been killed by Israeli gunfire, not Hamas gunfire. So, but you see the Israeli government tried to denigrate what Hamas did by saying it was a terrorist action, etc. No, it was a well-planned, well-executed military assault on Israel. And if Hamas is going to plan something to that level, and it, some people say, and I believe it took at least a year, maybe more, to plan this operation. You don't plan something, you don't plan to begin something and not have an idea on how you want it to end. There was a reason Hamas started this fight. And I think the reason is clear, that they needed to break the paradigm of the Abraham Accord, the agreement that was signed during the Trump administration that normalized relations, or sought to normalize relations between Israel and the Arab world at the expense of Palestinian statehood. The conditions that were created within the Abraham Accord about Palestinian statehood meant that there was never going to be a Palestinian state. And as Israel was moving toward reconciliation with Saudi Arabia, I think Hamas recognized that if that happened, there would never be a Palestinian state, ever, that Israel wins. So what needed to be done was to initiate a military operation on the scope and scale of which it changed the entire paradigm in the Middle East. And this is what happened. But it's not just about the embarrassment that they inflicted on Israel on October 7th. It's what they want to happen next. Let's be clear. the Israeli crimes against Gaza were predictable, meaning we know what Israel's policy is regarding collective punishment. They've actually put it in writing, the Dahiwa policy, mowing the grass. Since 2006, it's been officially stated as the policy of the Israeli Defense Force. So everybody knew what Israel was going to do. You just needed to create the conditions that had Israel doing what it wanted to do on a massive scale. And so the Hamas attack was designed to humiliate Israel, and then compel Israel to do something big, not something small, not something medium, something big. And Israel has done that. And what they're doing right now is the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza, collective punishment of the Palestinian people. And the reason Hamas wanted this to happen, I'm being a little cynical here, but it had to happen. Just like in order for Martin Luther King to succeed in the civil rights movement in the South, he needed to be beaten by white police officers. He needed to be arrested. Atrocities needed to occur to shock the American public into saying something's wrong here. And so what Hamas did is humiliate Israel, and then Israel did what Hamas knew they were going to do: respond massively, collectively punishing the Palestinian people. And what is occurring here is Israel's losing the public relations war, which is what Hamas wanted. When you commit an atrocity, the world normally lines up against you. But what's happening right now is that the biggest atrocity being committed is by Israel against the Palestinian people. And this was by design. Hamas also is challenging Israel to come and get them. And Hamas is prepared for this aspect of the fight. They have gone deep underground in a tunnel network that is fully equipped to survive for a lengthy period of time. And the tunnels are constructed in a manner which enhances the defensive qualities of Gaza, whether it's been bombed or not. Israel's bombing is not impacting Hamas at all. Yeah, one tunnel might collapse and kill 20 guys here. Another tunnel might be damaged here. But by and large, Hamas, the military capability of Hamas, is intact. The only people suffering from the bombing are the Palestinian people. And again, this was by design. The more Israel bombs the innocent population of Gaza, the more damage is done to the reputation of Israel.
It seems to me that they don't have any long-term strategy on their part. By these attacks,
Israel or Hamas?
Israel.
Israel's only strategy is to survive.
That's the case. If they want to survive, they have to survive with all these Arab nations that's surrounding Israel. Because it seems that by these attackings, they are getting worse politically with these Arab nations, with Turkey, with other nations. It doesn't seem that they have a long-term strategy for surviving in that region.
Well, actually, they had a brilliant strategy for surviving in that region. And that was to diminish the possibility of Palestinian statehood. Again, I bring up the fact that had Hamas not attacked on October 7th, there was a good likelihood that Israel would have normalized relations with Saudi Arabia. And that's the grand strategy of Israel, and it was winning. Israel got the United States to support the Abraham's Accord, which eliminated a Palestinian state as a possibility. Yes, in writing, they say it could happen if this happened, this happened, this happened, but none of that's going to happen. Israel's guaranteeing it isn't going to happen. Israel's grand strategy was working. They were winning. The Palestinians were losing. Not anymore. And now what's happened is that Israel is desperately trying to get back on track, but they've lost the narrative. The narrative has been taken over by Hamas, who is successfully using Israel's genocidal behavior against the people of Palestine as a weapon against Israel. And as you mentioned, Turkish President Recep Erdogan has said that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. Now, we know that Turkey never recognized Hamas as a terrorist organization, but he's coming out and saying that they are mujahideen, that they are resistance fighters, that they are working on the cause of God. This is a big deal. And because Turkey is giving voice to that which is believed throughout the Arab world. And the the Israelis right now are holding on to a wing and a prayer that they can get things back to where they were pre-October 7th. They think that they can defeat Hamas, but they know they can't. Hamas is an ideology, and the ideology of resistance is being magnified 100-fold with every bomb that's dropped on Gaza. Rather than defeating Hamas, Israel is expanding Hamas. Hamas has taken over in Turkey. It's in the United States in the streets. People are coming out in support of Hamas. People are starting to recognize Israel for what it is, because Israel no longer has the smooth-talking, well-educated con artists who would sell Israel as an extension of America, a democracy just like America, the same values as America. They're not even pretending that right now. They're putting forward generals and politicians who are saying things that if you eliminated the term Arab and Jew and replaced it with Jew and German, these speeches being given by Israeli is the same thing that Nazi Germans were saying in the 1930s and early 1940s, the exact same thing. And the world is seeing this. This is unfiltered. Israel is not like us. It is not a democracy that has as its principal reason for existence political Zionism, which allows Israel to behave as if they are the chosen few from God, exceptional people who have an inherent right to oppress those who get in the way of the creation of a greater Israel. I am an American, and in America, a fundamental principle is that all men, and now by extension, all women, are created equal. There is no supremacy attached to Christian, Muslim, or Jew, or atheist, or Buddhist, or any other religion out there. All people are human. All men are created equal. And yet Israel operates on the premise that Jews are superior, that Jews are the chosen ones, that Jews have a covenant with God to come to the Holy Land, and anything is allowed and tolerated if it fulfills that, to include the oppression of the Goyim. And that is a term that is being used more and more in Israel today. Goyim, that means, it literally means an animal, a subhuman. The Israelis treat anybody who's not in favor of a Zionist state as animals. You know who else speaks like that? Stepan Bandera and his Ukrainian nationalists are the same thing about the exceptionalism of Ukrainian nationalism and the subhuman status attached to Russians, to Poles, to Jews. But we weren't allowed to say this because you couldn't speak out against Israel like this. Right now, we don't have to say anything because Israel's actions speak for themselves. The world is seeing the reality of what Israel is, and the world is standing up. As we speak, the General Assembly is coming together. And I hope they're going to act in the spirit of 1956, when the Security Council was frozen over the issue of the Suez Canal, and the General Assembly, with America's blessing, came forward and imposed its will on the international community, because the General Assembly has that power. And it is time for the General Assembly to take control of this situation and condemn Israel and punish Israel for the genocidal activities. You cannot have an Israeli ambassador in the United Nations criticizing the Secretary General of the United Nations for calling Israel out for what they are. If anybody's to be expelled from the United Nations, it is the Israeli ambassador and the nation of Israel. And if they're not careful, people like me who believe firmly that Israel has a right to exist and that Israel must be defended regardless of the criminal policies, you're going to lose me, Israel. And when you lose me, it's over for you. Because when I flip to the other side, everybody else is going to flip. Because I used to be a very close friend of Israel. I used to stand with Israel. I used to be on their side, and they have lost me.
It seems that Israelis are postponing their ground attack in the Gaza. Is that viable to go on the ground in Gaza? What's at stake for them?
I think we have to go back in history to answer this question, to the Battle of Stalingrad. Around October of 1942, before the Soviets had begun the operation to encircle Stalingrad, the Germans, the Sixth Army, was still pushing to try and get to capture all of the west bank of the Volga River. There was an area in Stalingrad, I think it was called the Barricades Factory, and it had been bombed into oblivion, into rubble. And the surviving Soviets had dug into that factory and were waiting. The Germans brought in specially trained units sapper units and combat engineer units that had the tactics, the equipment, the experience to carry this out. And these sappers were put in, we're talking thousands of them, were sent in, and they were slaughtered immediately, slaughtered, because it's the most dangerous kind of fight in the world. And the Germans who were being slaughtered were the most highly trained specialists in urban warfare that Germany had. Now we fast forward to Gaza, that's been bombed into oblivion. Again, let's understand that Hamas knows what they want to happen. Hamas has has prepared the battlefield. The battlefield is exactly what Hamas wants it to be. They have trained for this. They are ready for this. Israel, on the other hand, has mobilized 300,000 reservists who are not trained for this, who are not motivated for this. These are people who were pulled out of their soft civilian life and have been called in to engage in the deadliest form of combat known to man. Now, when you do urban warfare, especially in the modern environment, you have to wear full combat equipment. That we're talking 50, 60, 70 pounds, depending on what you're doing. If you've been a civilian and you've been sitting in an office eating donuts, drinking coffee, partying at night, all that, and now you're taken out of that life and you're told, here, put on this combat kit and you're going in, you're going to die. Because what's going to happen is you're going to run 100 meters, you're going to have a heart attack and die. And if you don't have a heart attack and die, you're going to be hyperventilating. You're going to forget your tactical common sense. And the Hamas fighter who has been training for this is going to pop up, pop 3 rounds in your head, pop down, disappear, and you're dead. Probably your other friends are dead too, because you're fat, no good, useless soldiers. That's the reality of the Israeli army today. They have a handful of units that have some capabilities, but they're not that great to begin with. The Israeli army just isn't that good. That's one of the things that happened on October 7th, is that Hamas proved that the Israeli army just isn't that good. They also proved that Israeli intelligence isn't that good. Now, to go to war in an urban environment, you need at least 2 things. You need a very good army. Israel doesn't have one. And you need really good intelligence about where the enemy is. They obviously don't know a damn thing about Hamas. If they did, this wouldn't have happened. They know nothing. They are literally blind. So they are not going to carry out an assault on Gaza, because they cannot carry out an assault on Gaza. They will be slaughtered if they carry out an assault on Gaza. And this is what the United States has stepped in and said, don't do it. And there's another reason why, because even if political figures, and remember, the politicians today that are sounding so brave and so fierce, they're the ones that created October 7th. It was their incompetence that created October 7th. The Israeli public doesn't trust them anymore, and they will be replaced, but they are desperate not to be replaced. That's one thing all politicians have in common, is they don't want to leave office. And so Netanyahu and his cabinet of right-wing fanatics do not want to be kicked out. So they are talking strong, and they are speaking of going into Gaza, and they may override the concerns of the military. And remember, the senior military officers are also fools, idiots who caused this problem. The chief of staff, the minister of defense, all of these bigwigs are incompetent. They are incompetent. They should be relieved. Some of them should be shot for what they've done or failed to do. But now they're talking tough because they're trying to save their reputations. And they're going to save their reputations by sacrificing thousands of Israeli soldiers who are not prepared for this battle. And here's the dangerous part, because frankly speaking, I don't care about fat Israeli reservists that go into Gaza. May they all die. That's a decision they made and their governments made. If they want to sacrifice themselves on that hill, so be it. Not my concern. But my problem is if they go in, because in Gaza will be civilians, and the Israelis have already said that they'll treat anything that moves as a Hamas supporter and they will kill it. So the million women and children and men who are in Gaza, who have survived the bombings, will be slaughtered by the Israelis. Not Hamas, but the innocent Palestinians will be slaughtered. And this will be too much for Hezbollah and Iran to take, and they will intervene. And now we have a general war, and that's my problem. I care about that. I don't care anymore. I told you, I used to be a friend of Israel. I used to train side by side with the Israeli force, not train, operate. We weren't training. We were doing real world stuff with the Israeli forces. They were my friends. and I considered them to be my allies. Not anymore. I not only don't care about them, I want them to lose, because only by losing can we break the paradigm of control that they've had over the Middle East peace process. Because there is no Middle East peace. There has never been Middle East peace, and there will never be Middle East peace so long as there is political Zionism in place. Political Zionism must be defeated. It must be defeated politically, and it must be defeated militarily. And so I pray for Israel's defeat, not the strategic defeat where everybody's killed. No, but I want Israel to recognize that they are not supermen. They are not exceptional. They are humans just like everybody else, that they bleed just like everybody else. There is no such thing as Israeli exceptionalism. I know they consider themselves to be God's chosen, but they're not. They're not. They're just like you and I. In fact, they're worse, because they believe in their supremacy, but they don't have the ability to act on that. So I pray for Israel's defeat on the battlefield, because we need them to be defeated so that we can change the dynamic that existed under the Abrams Accord, where Israel was ready to normalize relations with the Arab world and the Palestinian people were forgotten. Now the Palestinian people aren't forgotten. They're there. And we need them to get their own homeland. We need the Palestinian people to get their own state. And this is the time to do it. It can only happen with Israel losing. So I pray for Israel to be defeated. But I can't support Israeli action that enlarges this conflict, that brings down Hezbollah and Iran. Not because I'm concerned about Hezbollah and Iran killing Israeli soldiers, kill them all. And I hate to be this blunt about it, but Israel is on the wrong side of history right here. There's nothing good that can be said about Israel today. Listen to the statements of Israeli politicians and Israeli soldiers. These are hate-filled statements where they call the Palestinians animals, and their actions that are derived from these statements are genocidal, literally the definition of genocide, and it's being ignored by the United States and the West. So we need the Israeli army to be destroyed, to be eliminated, to suffer a defeat. But it can't be done in a way that brings everybody else down. But that is the Israeli mindset, the Samson option, they call it. Now, that's normally attached to their nuclear deterrence, meaning that if it looks like Israel is going to be destroyed, that they will kill everybody with their nuclear weapons. But it's also just a mindset that says, if we can't live the way we want to live, we will bring everybody down with us, which tells you right off the bat that Israel is the greatest threat to peace and security in the world today. Israel, as it's currently manifested, the political Zionism of Israel is the single greatest threat to international peace and security, and it must be defeated. But that defeat has to be modulated, so to speak, by a desire for something after this fighting. This means that Israel must be allowed to exist. There must be a homeland for Jewish people in the homeland, in the Holy Land, where they can live in peace and security with their neighbors. But they live as equals. The day of Israeli exceptionalism is over. The day where America throws in billions of dollars to guarantee Israeli technological supremacy is over. Israel cannot be superior to any of its neighbors. It can be equal to its neighbors, and that's it. That's the future. And you know who we get to thank for making this possible? Hamas. Because if it weren't for what they did on October 7th, we'd be in a situation where Palestine was forgotten. The Palestinian people would never have a homeland.
How come the Israeli intelligence, which we know is one of the best, can be so blind about Hamas?
Well, let's first of all take a step back. Israeli Mossad, first of all, the problem of Hamas and its military capability is not the problem of Mossad. It's the problem of Amman, military intelligence. But both of those, when you bring them together, it's Israeli intelligence. And you said something interesting. We know they are the best in the world. They aren't the best in the world. Israel is a very small country with very limited capabilities, but they have created this propaganda machine of Mossad being the best. If you take a look at how Mossad acted after the Munich Olympics and their assassination program, it was incompetent. It was brutal. It wasn't smooth at all. Mossad tried to assassinate a Hamas leader in Amman, Jordan, by spraying a poison in his face, and they got caught. Two of them got arrested by the Jordanians, by the bodyguard, the guy who ran him down and put him on the ground. The other guys ran to the Israeli embassy and were cowering in fear. exposed. They're not good. They killed the wrong guy in Norway. They're not good. They're not good. We just have allowed them to create the perception that they are good. And the problem with that perception, again, I use a sports analogy. If we take two teams of equally qualified people, and the other team is convinced that this team is the best in the world, the best in the world. We're playing Mossad. Oh God, they're so good. They already lost when they go on the field, because Mossad has convinced them that they're better. But if you just view Mossad as the incompetent pieces of manure that they are, intelligence is a tough business. And you know who fails in the intelligence business? Cocky people. People who think they know it all, people who think they are superior, people who take shortcuts, and everything about Israel is a shortcut because it's not done through hard work. It's done by saying, I'm a Jew, I'm Israeli, help me, cheat, do this, that, and the other thing. And what happens when you go up against an entity like Hamas, Hamas doesn't view the Israelis as superior, because Hamas has successfully operated against the Israelis. They know the Israelis when they're at their best, and they know them at their worst. And Hamas built a plan that dealt with the reality of Israel. And the reality of Israel is they're not very good. October 7th proved that, proved it in spades. Their intelligence service just isn't that good because the Jews are not a supreme race. They are not imbued with some sort of special Jewish power. They don't wake up in the morning, drink Jewish coffee, and become supermen. They're humans just like us, the same as us. They get tired, they take shortcuts, they make mistakes. And if they buy into the notion of Jewish racial or ethnic supremacy, then they are not going to be aware of the mistakes they're making because they believe that they're above it. The Israelis became complacent. Look at their military. The first thing I learned in the Marine Corps is that in order to win, you have to be willing to wade in and kill people, physically kill them, terminate them. We practice with the bayonet. Nobody else practices with the bayonet anymore. We do. Why? Because it's about killing. It's about plunging steel into a body, twisting it, pulling it out, butt stroking, and going on. The physical act of terminating a life. The Israelis don't do that. Why? Because as I'm plunging a bayonet, the other person could be plunging a bayonet too. And I could take one in the chest. I could die. I have to be prepared for that reality. Israelis do not want to die. They are casualty averse. When they lose an Israeli soldier, that is a strategic defeat for the nation. They mourn. So they have built a way of war that avoids closing with and destroying the enemy through firepower maneuver. They have allowed technology to take over. They have allowed an over-reliance on aircraft, on missiles, on standoff weapons. The entire wall around Gaza, it was a wall designed to keep Hamas in, to prevent them from coming through tunnels. The wall was built to detect tunnels coming under. That's the Israeli mindset. Remote control cannons operated from a control booth where some 18 to 19-year-old girl sat there and drank tea and ate a donut and manipulated a computer, playing a computer game, because that's what it was to her. An image on a screen, a cursor, and shooting rounds. Bam, 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 bam. But what happened? Boom. When the drone took it out. Now what are you going to do, honey? Now what are you going to do? Because you can't see anything. So you're sitting there, sipping your coffee, eating your donut. Hamas is closing in. They're taking out your sensors because they've planned it. They're not lazy. They know what they need to do. They come in, they knock on the door, take it down, and now you're dead because you didn't prepare for it. You're not standing up. You haven't fixed bayonets. You're not charging the door. You're not ready to die. You're scared. You're cowering. That's what happened to the vast majority of the Israeli forces on October 7th. They were scared. They were cowering. And if they go into Gaza, it's going to be 100,000 scared, cowering boys and girls who aren't ready for this fight because Israel isn't that good. And we need to make sure that everybody in the world knows this because Israel's been fooling everybody.